Thankfully, most of us will never have to serve in a war. We admire the courage of the men and women who do, but the closest that most of us get to seeing the military in action is through newspapers or in history class at school. There's another way to get in touch with the history of the world's military forces, though, and that's through the relics they leave behind. You can do that right now in this video, full of amazing military finds. During the darkest days of the Second World War, things got desperate for the British. The Nazis attacked every night, resources were spread thin, and defeat was a distinct possibility. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill prepared for the prospect of a full-blown land invasion of his country by building top-secret bunkers full of highly trained soldiers who would be expected to fight in the streets if that were to happen. And in March 2020, one of those long-forgotten bunkers was found. This facility, hidden deep inside Scottish woodland, is one of the hundreds that would have housed Churchill's auxiliary units. 8 soldiers, trained in hand-to-hand combat, were stationed in each bunker, with instructions to come out and assassinate specific German military targets if they were called upon. It's long been rumored, but never confirmed, that those secret orders included suicide missions. The cramped bunker is only 23 feet long and 10 feet wide. We'll never know who was hidden away in here, but they were the country's last line of defense if the very worst was to happen. Thankfully, that moment never came. Since November 1917, the German submarine UC-47 has been at the bottom of the North Sea, 22 miles off the coast of Flamborough Head in Yorkshire, England. She was sent there after being rammed by a British Royal Navy patrol boat. In August 2020, over a century since she was sunk, the wreck was photographed and investigated for the first time by marine archaeologists. A team from the University of Southampton sent 2 remote-control submarines down to the seabed to take video and 3D images of what's left of the long-forgotten wreck. The story told by the images isn't pretty. It looks like not only was the UC-47 rammed, it was then repeatedly depth-charged by the same Navy vessel. The Germans always suspected that the Navy entered the submarine after it was sunk to obtain military paperwork, including detailed maps, but the survey team says that the depth of the wreck, some 150 feet below the surface, makes this unlikely. The repeated use of depth charges might have been an attempt to crack the wreck open, in the hope that paperwork would float to the surface, but there's no evidence that this brute force approach was successful. There are German and British wrecks all over the British Isles from both the First and Second World Wars, and many of them are yet to be found. In February 2020, even experienced British historian and television presenter Dan Snow was stunned by what he found at the bottom of a flooded quarry in Ballywick, Guernsey. The island was occupied by German forces during the war but eventually reclaimed by the Allies in May 1945. The cleanup operation was huge, and local rumors have always said that the Allies took the easy approach of simply dumping all the unwanted artillery into a quarry. We now know the rumors are true. Among the piles of German artillery beneath the water are several wheeled guns, and the half-track personnel carrier that was used to shove them into the quarry in the first place. Dan believes there are hundreds of artifacts down there, some of which might be salvageable if they can be brought back to dry land. Doing so would be a costly operation though, and thus far he hasn't been able to secure the necessary funding to perform the work. He might get there eventually, but in the meantime, all we have are these pictures. Cluster bombs are extremely controversial weapons because of their lack of accuracy and their propensity to harm innocent people. Their use is discouraged everywhere in the world, but there's always somebody willing to use them. We know they've been used by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and in May 2016, the US and the UK found themselves facing difficult questions about why a collection of American and British-made cluster bombs had been discovered there. According to the British, the cluster bombs are old, and their passage into Saudi Arabia is undocumented. Based on photos of the munitions, it appears they're of a type manufactured by a company called Hunting Engineering during the 1970s, long before cluster bombs were banned under international law. In theory, any cluster bombs that still existed at that point ought to have been destroyed. It's now obvious that at least some of the UK's stockpiles survived and made their way halfway across the world to be used in a vicious bombing campaign more than 40 years later. The UK government opened an official inquiry into the discovery of the bombs, but the outcome of that inquiry is unknown as of 2021. Military finds are often made accidentally by archaeologists who are actually looking for something entirely different. In February 2020, a team of researchers looking for the ruins of a Roman villa close to the German city of Cologne had to pause their work when they found an incredibly well-preserved Soviet spy radio. The discovery was more than a little alarming because the dig site is very close to a German military airbase and nuclear research center. It seems likely that whoever owned and operated this radio was sent by the USSR to spy on those facilities. Even though it looks pristine, it's likely that it was buried 30 years ago after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The radio's airtight box has protected it so well over the past 3 decades that it would still be fully operational were it not for the fact that the batteries have expired. Technically speaking, this is a model R394KM transmitter and receiver with the codename Stritz, which translates into English as Swift, and was manufactured in 1987. With a range of 750 miles, it would have been capable of broadcasting as far as Warsaw in Poland, which was then under Soviet control. We're all familiar with the ancient archaeological site of Pompeii, a Roman city frozen in time after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79. If Pompeii has a modern-day equivalent, perhaps it's this old battlefield in Wittschate, Belgium. It provides us with a window through time, all the way back to the First World War, and it's as poignant as it is archaeologically fascinating. Here, we find the remains of more than 100 soldiers, still surrounded by their guns and their personal possessions. Belgian archaeologist Simon Verdegem had always believed the hillside was the site of an important battle, but wasn't able to prove it until he crowdfunded an archaeological survey under the inauspicious codename Dig Hill 80. All the relics of the fallen soldiers' lives are here, including rifles, ammunition, revolvers, full uniforms, watches, and even musical instruments like harmonicas. One fallen British soldier lay beside his bottle of HP sauce. An anonymous German lieutenant who fought in the war wrote that a soldier's greatest fear was to die on foreign soil and then be forgotten. Thanks to Simon and people like him, they'll all be remembered. For the past century, every time the United States of America and the United Kingdom have entered a war, they've done so as allies. Go back 2 centuries, though, and things were very different. The Brits and the Americans fought each other in 1812, but the war is rarely spoken of today. Travel to Canada, though, and you'll find a very well-preserved relic of that conflict in the shape of the British military's Fort Wellington. To Canada, or the Canadas as the territory was known back then, was on the British side of the war. It was from this fort that British-Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Red George MacDonell launched his successful raid on the American fort at Ogdensburg on February 22, 1813. The raid destroyed the American barracks and 3 of their ships, ending the threat it posed to British supply lines in the area. The fort was abandoned in 1820, long after the war ended, but it was briefly reoccupied in 1838 because of the rebellions in Upper and Lower Canada. There are no active soldiers there today, but it does still serve as a living museum. On July 30th, 1942, the American submarine USS Grunion, designation SS-216, was returning to base on Emmaknock Island off the coast of Alaska after successfully sinking 2 Japanese patrol boats. Shortly after turning back, the captain sent a message to base confirming there was heavy anti-submarine activity in the area. There were no further transmissions. The Gado-class submarine never made it back to base, and the vessel and its crew of 70 were presumed lost at sea. In August 2019, part of the wreck was finally discovered by the Lost 52 project. The bow of the vessel is 2,700 feet below the surface, close to the tiny island of Kiska, resting on a volcanic slope. The rest of the submarine is thought to be a short distance away. The Lost 52 group is so named because it was formed with the intention of locating 52 specific submarines that went missing during the USA's Second World War operations and have yet to be found. The discovery of the USS Grunion is another name to tick off the list, and hopefully, a little closure for the families of the deceased crew. But there's still a lot of work left to do. The project continues. Projects like Lost 52 are supported by other, smaller groups of technical divers and marine archaeologists who frequently make discoveries of their own. Another one of the submarines on Lost 52's list was found in September 2020, when the wreck of the USS Grenadier, designation SS-210, was found off the coast of Thailand. History tells us that the Grenadier was deliberately scuttled by its crew on April 21, 1943, to avoid capture by the Japanese planes and ships that surrounded it. Despite being captured, imprisoned, and tortured, the crew never revealed any military information, and all but 4 of them survived the war. The Tamber-class submarine is now 262 feet below the water, and roughly 80 nautical miles away from the coast of Phuket. The wreck was eventually located by a Singapore-based yacht using side-scan sonar. Marine archaeologists followed up the sonar discovery by conducting 6 dives down to the wreck and taking precise measurements of the conning tower, capstans, and hatches. These measurements were matched against technical drawings of the Grenadier, thus confirming the veracity of the find. Although they're excited by their discovery, the team is refusing to disclose the precise location of the wreck because of a recent spate of scrap metal looting that's gone on in the immediate vicinity. Like the Titanic, the USS Nevada was once described as unsinkable. Unlike the Titanic, the Nevada deserved that label. The enormous battleship saw active duty in both World Wars and survived them both. It was at Pearl Harbor during the attack on the 7th of December 1941 and remained afloat despite being hit by 10 bombs and a torpedo attack. After brief repairs, it went to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, remaining in service until the end of the war. By that point, the ship was old and approaching the end of its useful life. The U.S. Navy decided to use it as a target during weapons tests. Even then, under attack from its own side, it proved to be incredibly hard to destroy. The ship withstood 2 atomic weapon blasts in the Marshall Islands and became so radioactive that nobody could board it. But it didn't sink. A sustained torpedo assault in 1948 finally sent it to the watery depths. That was the last the world saw of this resilient vessel until April 2020, when the wreck was located 15,400 feet below the surface, close to Pearl Harbor, by the marine archaeology company Ocean Infinity. The USS Nevada can never be raised, but at least we finally know where it rests. As we mentioned earlier, the Nazis never made it as far as the British mainland on foot during the Second World War. They did, however, occupy the Channel Islands between England and France. While there, they set up one of their notorious concentration camps on the island of Alderney. Lager Sylt concentration camp is rarely spoken of by British historians, but it's a place every bit as dreadful as you'd expect. Little is known about what went on in Alderney during the war, because the Nazis burnt all their records before liberation forces arrived. The camp has largely been destroyed, and the locals were always reluctant to talk. It was always rumored that many of the islanders collaborated with their captors, but this has never been proven. Because of this, it's still nicknamed the Island of Silence. Recently, laser and radar mapping of the island has allowed us to build a digital picture of Lagersilt and the railroads that surrounded it, all of which were built by slave labor. The same mapping project also revealed what are likely to be further tunnels and bunkers beneath the ground, but thus far, the island's local government has refused permission for anybody to go digging for them. When the Nazis stole and looted treasure from the countries they invaded and conquered in Europe, they tended to group it all together and stash it somewhere for safekeeping. One such place was Nowy Sącz Royal Castle, a 600-year-old medieval ruin in Poland. Archaeologists found a treasure chest buried on the grounds of the castle in June 2020, and when they opened it up, they discovered it to be full of looted silver. Based on the nature of the items in the chest, it's likely that they were taken from Jewish families. Much of it comes in the form of tableware, including ornate cutlery and goblets. It was an amateur metal detectorist who picked up the first sign of the treasure, but he quickly called in the professionals when he realized the scale of what he was dealing with. Many of the items are probably native to Poland, although some appear to have come from Austria. The Nazis turned Nowy Sącz Castle into a barracks in 1941, and were only forced out in 1945, when the Polish resistance effectively blew the castle up. They'd beaten the Nazis, but they destroyed a historic local landmark in the process. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!